Thank you all for coming from far and wide, family, friends, colleagues, fellow students, faculty.
All right, are we ready? Right on time. Okay. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Hazzan Linda Bernstein. Over the years, I've really come to appreciate Linda's tenacity, her work ethic, her really extraordinary type A personality, and really her ability to tackle and willingness to tackle very large topics. For her Master of Jewish Studies thesis, she tackled a topic that was very important and still is to many of us: how Jewish communities adapted to the COVID-19 pandemic. This particular thesis for her rabbinical program deals with something that is arguably equally important, which is the present and future of the conservative movement in the United States. She did an incredible amount of work for this, numerous interviews, all kinds of research, very skillfully put together. And I think you're going to appreciate her slides as well, which I'm quite envious of. So without further ado, here's Linda.
Thank you, Cantor Jonathan. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to hit play. There we go. Hope all of you can see this. All right. Welcome to my rabbinical thesis presentation, The Changing Face of Conservative Judaism. I'd like to begin by recognizing and profusely thanking my thesis advisor, Revital Samech Goldreich, and also to my thesis reader and overall advisor, Cantor Jonathan Friedman. Their guidance, expert input, and support were invaluable as I took on this challenging topic. Now, why did I select this topic? To learn the answer, please join me as we briefly look back to see how conservative Judaism has impacted my life. The long, rich, and sometimes painful Jewish history of my family goes back to the old country in Germany and Poland. My parents fled Nazi Germany persecution in 1938 and came to America bringing with them a heritage steeped in Judaism. Tragically, they also carried forth with them deep, unspeakable regret for those they had left behind, especially my paternal grandparents, who had no path to get out despite every effort to save them, were deported and perished in the Holocaust. With amazing resilience and optimism, my parents forged a new life for our family in the foggy Richmond district of San Francisco, just a half a block from Golden Gate Park, and raised 4 children. My dear mom was a balabasta extraordinaire who saw to it that every Shabbat and every Jewish holiday was authentically and deliciously celebrated. My parents were leaders in our Orthodox synagogue. My dad served as president and my mom as a producer of sumptuous kiddushes and tefillin club breakfasts. Now, as you can see, my Jewish education began at a very early age. In the afternoons, I attended Hebrew school and eventually graduated from the Bureau of Jewish Education's 4-year Hebrew high school program as the only female in the class. But my Jewish experiences were not always satisfying. At the weekly junior congregation, girls did not have the opportunity to lead services or have a bat mitzvah. I went to a public school where my Judaism was more something that set me apart from others than expressed openly. For example, since I kept kosher, I had to stealthily eat my mother's lovingly prepared, overstuffed tuna sandwiches that invariably broke through the wax paper wrapping, while everyone else was having Oscar Mayer wieners at the birthday party. My view of Jewish life changed dramatically when I was among the first Bay Area kids to attend conservative Judaism's Camp Ramah, Ojai, California, for the first time, starting at the age of 11, and experienced a vibrant, ruach-filled way of Jewish life that I could openly enjoy and celebrate. The facilities were primitive, as these were the years before the old camp, with its white-painted rocks and crumbling edifice, was replaced with a gorgeous year-round convention facility down Foothill Road. And yet, the motley and dear memories of my 10 months there as a camper, office girl, counselor in training, and finally full counselor have endured and inspired me. I would eagerly sign up to lead the Birkat HaMazon, the Grace After Meals, for the entire camp of some 700 campers and counselors. It made me realize that girls can be prayer leaders just as well as boys, and was likely the early impetus for me to become a rabbi cantor. Fast forward to 1974. Newly married, my husband and I joined Beth Shalom, the largest conservative shul in San Francisco, where I had previously attended USY meetings as a teen. Our kids were bar and bat mitzvah there, but also attended Brandeis Hillel Day School, happily following in my Ramah footsteps, and were leaders in USY. Over the years, I served on the Beth Shalom board, as a Shaliach Tzibor, and even a country western Queen Esther. And now, 50 years later, my wonderful kids have their own wonderful kids. So there's less motivation for me to engage in Purim carnivals and other congregational family events. And I'm sad to see many of the old regulars coming into shul with canes and walkers. And I'm also, frankly, a bit bored hearing the same melodies every week. And yet new melodies often leave me cold. So I had to ask myself, are my feelings of apathy reflective of the mood among other conservative Jews around the country? Are they shared by all generations, unique to my empty nester demographic, or just to me personally? I had heard that conservative Judaism is struggling, which is both shocking and disappointing, to say the least. If I'm going to be a conservative rabbi and cantor, I needed to find out what is happening with conservative Judaism and the movement today and where it's headed. My positive conservative Judaism experiences of the past decades are clearly not today's reality, with predictions by many of gloom and doom for the future. How will I have to change with the times to ensure that my congregation is engaged and growing and not disinterested and shrinking? Most importantly, how must conservative Judaism and the movement, as represented by these key organizations, as represented by these key organizations and their many partners, with its long-standing reputation of blending tradition and modernity, need to change to maintain its viability for the future? A quote from the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism. The trademark of the conservative movement is rooted in the wisdom gained at the intersection of heritage and progress. The conservative movement was once the largest denomination in the U.S., appealing primarily to Eastern European Jews and their descendants, who are uncomfortable with the German-American essence of American Reform Judaism, but also wanting to blend into American society. So, what happened? Recent reports say that conservative Judaism is dying with dwindling membership. The number of USCJ member synagogues has dropped by 1/3 from 832 in 1971 to 562 today. Similarly, the number of Jews who identified as conservative in 2020, 17%, is less than half of what it was in 1971 at 41%. For every person who has joined conservative Judaism, nearly 3 people who were raised in the conservative movement have abandoned it. There are critics from outside and within the conservative movement on both ends of the traditional and modern spectrum, and they ask, is conservative Judaism straying too far from its halakhic roots, or not adapting rapidly enough to keep with the evolving social trends and the needs of young people seeking a meaningful Jewish experience on a limited budget? My thesis addresses many of these issues and more. This thesis profiles the changing face of conservative Judaism, illuminates current trends, examines research and multimedia reports, questions key opinion leaders and practitioners, pinpoints what is working, not working, and why, recommends additional research and actionable ideas to clarify goals and ways to achieve them, and hopes to inform the strategic planning process. The purpose of the Thesis project is to characterize the past and current state of conservative Judaism in the United States in 6 key areas: identity, affiliation, halakhic, liturgical, theological, and other policy issues, marriage and family, education, and strategy. Basically asking what is working and what is not. The goal is to take these learnings and make educated recommendations for the future of conservative Judaism and the movement, to see how they can best evolve to meet the changing needs of their current constituencies, attract the new generation, and ensure growth in the decades to come. The data sources are twofold. First, an extensive review of the literature looking at population research, synagogue studies, rulings and responsa, news and commentary. National studies, such as the latest Pew Research Center findings from 2020, as well as regional and local studies which characterize practice trends, attitudes, level of engagement, synagogue and unaffiliated entity membership, and home rituals in specific communities are compared and contrasted. Key responsa and rulings of the Central Halakhic Authority of the movement, known as the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, are reviewed. Timely and relevant press reports and editorials that offer opinions on the current trends and future directions of the movement and Judaism as a whole are highlighted. Secondly, interviews with 11 experts representing national and local conservative organizations, synagogues, and the Jewish community offer a wide range of viewpoints on the state of conservative Judaism. Among them are leaders within the Rabbinical Assembly, now partnered with the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, the director of Camp Ramah, Northern California, a distinguished professor at American Jewish University, local congregational rabbis, one from Beth Shalom and the other from Am Tikva, a newly merged synagogue, and 3 of the first female rabbinical graduates of the Jewish Theological Seminary. Many important issues affecting the state and future of conservative Judaism are revealed. Here is a selection of topics grouped within our 6 key areas that are identified and discussed in the thesis. Examples include the changing level and types of Jewish engagement, trends in denominational switching, key relevant responsa of recent decades, rules and restrictions against officiating at interfaith marriages, the high cost and variable quality of Jewish education, and factors contributing to and suggested ways to solve the rabbinic shortage. So, what's working in conservative Judaism today? The Rabbinical Assembly has completed strategic planning, and the USCJ is undergoing strategic planning as in progress. Some synagogues are thriving. Many congregants have positive worship, spiritual, friendship, social action, and educational experiences. Camp Ramah is considered the jewel of the movement. ExploringJudaism.org is the new digital home for conservative Masorti Judaism and is one of the few successes identified by Rabbi Konigsberg of the Rabbinical Assembly USCJ, along with its recent organizational partnerships. What's not working and why? First, there's poor data. There's a lack of good research and antiquated definitions of engagement. Young people are leaving. They're either not joining anything or not joining what conservative Judaism is offering. They're marrying later, so they have less of an incentive to join a synagogue. They find the cost of synagogue membership to be prohibitive, and or they're not finding meaning in the old model. And many think USY is outdated has recently been marred both with controversy. There's a rabbinical shortage. Contributing factors include professional dissatisfaction, stress, the length and cost of rabbinical training, and once in practice, restrictions on editorial freedom at the pulpit. Jewish education, as mentioned, is another issue. As mentioned, Jewish day school tuitions are prohibitive for many, and there is variable quality between day schools, Hebrew schools, and other forms of Jewish education. and what I call halakhic strains. Rules are slow in coming, not always consistent, and relevant. This thesis produces 20 recommendations or actionable ideas based upon the research findings that hopefully will be considered by the conservative movement in its ongoing strategic planning process. Here are just a few of those ideas. First, embrace and grow what is working. Look inward and outward, especially at the needs of young people. Improve research methods, re-examine definitions. Apply standards for Jewish education in different venues. Make Jewish day schools more affordable. Creatively address the rabbinical shortage, better understand professional issues. Offer a best practices repository and make halakhic rulings in a timely fashion with relevancy for today. This next slide I call the hurdles and hopes. It talks about some of the difficulties in conducting this research. The changing face of conservative Judaism is comprised of many expressions, including frustration, puzzlement, regret, but also stubborn pride, determination, and hope. Looking in the mirror, we struggle to see the fine features of this troubled image. It requires special lenses that can see through the often cloudy haze of disparate, sometimes contradicting opinions, controversies, memories and nostalgia for better times. We try to wade through a host of old and new research studies with variable methodologies and study populations. Sort out different perspectives, work environments, and backgrounds of our interviewees, just to name a few of the challenges in formulating meaningful recommendations and conclusions. Yet despite these hurdles, this process has affirmed in my mind the strong desire of leadership on the national and local levels to make conservative Judaism work for today, preserve its existence, and foster its growth for future generations. In conclusion, there are many factors causing the downward trend in individual synagogue membership and overall engagement. The fact is, we still need to learn more about conservative Judaism in its current state before being able to derive constructive remedies for its problems and make changes for the future. The remedies are still to be determined. Most of the key opinion leaders feel conservative Judaism, if not the movement behind it, is worth saving, and there is optimism. A few final thoughts. What will the new face of conservative Judaism look like 25 years from now? It's hard to know and may have a few wrinkles, but one can be sure that change is coming. The final question is, will we still recognize it? Again, thank you to my AGRC faculty, students and staff, all my friends and relatives for coming on the Zoom today, and all of you who have come to honor me with your presence. If any of you have questions, please put them in the chat, and Eva will ask those questions on your behalf.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your questions. As Linda said, you can put them in the chat, and I will read them aloud. Okay, from Ahavat Torah, I see comparison with reform movement challenges. Hazzan, Linda, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I didn't really delve into reform movement challenges per se, but I did do some comparisons of trends within the movements and how the shifting of people from one denomination to the other has happened. And so there have been shifts out of the conservative movement into reform and also into the non-declarative denomination as well. So that's one of the things that's been shown in some of the studies that have been done. But I'm sure that some of these challenges that we face are probably shared by reform as well as Judaism as a whole, because overall in the general population, there have been studies that have shown, even within the Catholic religion, that people are shifting away from organized religion. They're finding other more creative, more meaningful ways to manifest their religious and spiritual life. And within Judaism, there's been a big shift to independent minyanim and other creative forms, even online support groups and on other ways that people are manifesting the search for a meaningful and spiritual experience.
Thank you. Jill Goldwright asks, what is one specific solution to be instituted short term?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I think one of the things is that, first of all, I hope that the conservative movement will read my thesis and will take it and look at the 20 different recommendations or actionable ideas that I presented. I think that one of the interesting things that could be done is looking at Jewish education across the board, and there are established standards that the conservative movement has set for Jewish education. But what I've found in talking with, let's say, the director at Camp Ramah is that, for example, he is faced with campers that some of them come from Jewish day schools and are very well versed, and some of them come from maybe once a week afternoon programs who are totally just getting used to hearing Hebrew. And so one of the things that I suggested was that the conservative movement maybe set a sort of a standard across the board for what every Jewish conservative child should aim toward in preparation, let's say, for their bar bat mitzvah, and make it less venue based as opposed to competency based. And so that's one of the, I think, important things that could be done. There's also a scholarship program that was established that I found out about that might help to allay some of the high costs of Jewish education at Jewish day schools. So that's another possible one that hopefully is starting to be in the works.
Thank you. Delilah had a similar question. I'm curious if there is a proposed solution to these challenges. So, Hazzan, Linda, I believe you answered that. Caitlin Bromberg asks, did you look at the historical origins of Con J to see why it was formed and whether those needs still exist?
Yes, as part of the literature review, I did a look back and to see what kind of how it formed, and I think one of the things that's happened is that it was originally formed and was populated by a lot of immigrants that came to the United States who were looking for something other than Reform Judaism, was something that was more halakhically connected in that sense. And a lot of those populations have shifted. They've moved from one place to another. Various synagogues that were in areas that were vibrant at one point, now those areas are not. And so, there's been a shifting around from those early days. And I think, and now what's happened is that the next generation is finding that the brick and mortar synagogue format is not necessarily one that appeals to them. And so that's why they've formed all these other kinds of creative ways of getting together. And they're still, going on and very vibrant. And what was interesting, one of the comments of Rabbi Ashira Konigsberg was that she actually applauds those kinds of things. She's a high-ranking person in the Rabbinical Assembly and USCJ, and her point was that we need to redefine what engagement is. It's not just someone who's a member of a conservative synagogue anymore. It's however a conservative Jew chooses to express their conservative Judaism. Okay, and so that might mean it's in a traditional synagogue, or it might mean it's an independent minyan, or it might be they decide that doing social action is what they want to do, and so, or a combination of all of it. So anyway, that's my answer.
Okay, Greg Marcus asks, were the perspectives of the older rabbis you interviewed different from the younger rabbis?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I had the honor of interviewing Rabbi Elliot Dorff, who is probably one of the key scholars of conservative Judaism. And it was really interesting to hear just the love he still has for conservative Judaism, having had devoted his whole career to it. And he's optimistic, and yet he says he was one of the ones that said, you need to speak with young people and find out what they want. And so, coming from him, I think that's an important message, is that even though he's steeped in the traditions of conservative Judaism, he realizes that we need to talk to young people and find out what is meaningful for them. What are some of the obstacles that they're facing in going to traditional conservative routes? And then as far as the younger groups of rabbis that I interviewed, some of them are involved. Like one, Rabbi Amanda Russell is the rabbi currently at Beth Shalom, and she was very excited about Beth Shalom and the vibrancy that's happening there, and there's lots of young families. And yet she also says it would be nice to see people more, like see more people other than just on the high holidays, but throughout the year. And she wishes more people would engage the rest of the year in those kinds of programs that she has set forth. And Rabbi Lariman of Tikva and the executive director, Talia Brass, who just went through a merger of a conservative and a reform together, they are facing their own challenges of merging those two denominations into one unit. And so that was very informative as well.
Eliyahu Kriegel says, great job, Linda, so inspired. Do you think conservative and reform Judaism will ever merge? Do you think all non-Orthodox movements might merge one day in the future?
I think there's always the possibility. I'm never going to say never, but and I think the differences between them in some ways are not as great maybe as they used to be. And I think that some of the policies are still different. Like, I'm not absolutely sure about this, what the policy is for officiating at a marriage between a Jew and a non-Jewish person. But in the conservative movement, conservative rabbis are not allowed to officiate. They can sit in the room now, which is a new thing, relatively new thing, but they cannot actually officiate. I'm not sure what that same regulation is for reform, but I would imagine that it may be a bit more liberal than that. And so one of the strong issues that came up quite often, I remember Rabbi Lerman talking about this, that she feels that if conservative Judaism would become more liberal in that regard, it could make a very big difference, and it could almost equalize the playing field a bit more between the denominations. Because, and also Rabbi Russell mentioned that there are a lot of non-Jewish members that or non-Jewish people that become members of conservative synagogues now because of all the intermarriage that exists. And there are restrictions on what they can do in a particular service. And so and it's disappointing for if a young couple comes to the synagogue and wants to get married, and then the rabbi says, well, that's great, but I can't officiate at your ceremony. And so that creates some bad blood in a way, even though the non-Jewish members are definitely welcome within the synagogue. And so there's this struggle right now on that particular issue.
Sarah Sipora asks, if you become a pulpit rabbi in a conservative congregation, what would your first change be if you could change anything?
Ooh, okay, that's a good one. Let's see. Well, first of all, before I decide to change anything, I would want to see what the status quo is, because I think sometimes if you jump in and start changing too much at first, it's not a good idea. So let's assume that I have been there for a while, and I decide that it's time to make some changes. I think I would try to engage as many generations within the synagogue as possible and offer programs that are appealing to all ages, not just the young families, but also to older generations. I know that Beth Shalom, for example, has just started a more senior-oriented group. And so, I think that's something that's important. And I would just try to Oh, the other thing that came up and that could be very important is that when a new family comes and joins a synagogue, is that you check back with them after a while and say, are you happy with what you're experiencing? Is there something else that you would like? And so that way you're having some follow up. And similarly, and this is where some of the data is lacking, is why are people leaving a particular synagogue, and to survey those that have left and find out what it is that caused them to leave. And so I think overall, I would try to do more data gathering and find out what's going on within my synagogue and explore all the different groups and why people are coming, why people are going, are they happy, are we meeting your needs? Obviously, you can't change everything for one person or one family, but it's important for the leadership, for the board, and for the ritual committee and other programming committees to know what it is that is most engaging and appealing.
Caitlin Bromberg asks, can you get action items down to 3? Did you look at the ways that Park Avenue Synagogue in New York is leading in this work?
Um, well, I mean, there are 20 action items. I could probably try to prioritize them. I didn't specifically look at that synagogue, but I have looked at them in the past, and I've been on some of their services, and I'm always impressed by what they do and the high quality of services and media that they offer. And the fact is that they are almost like the ideal. They have a lot of they have a big budget to do these kinds of things. They have the top talent. They've got everything going for them. And I think there are a lot of synagogues out there who are not in that position, who are struggling. Maybe they've only got one clergy. That clergy has to wear all the hats. They have to be a kolbo. They have to, they may have a limited budget. And so, I think and that's why some synagogues are emerging, because they can't do it by themselves. They feel that they need to have at least adequate numbers to form a meaningful group of people. And if that means crossing denominations, so be it. That's what happened in San Francisco.
We don't have a name for this question, but it reads, I've noticed a huge lack of attendance by teenagers at conservative synagogues. Any ideas on how to change this?
Well, I think one of the ways, well, first of all, USY and teenagers at conservative synagogues used to be sort of synonymous. And so there would be USY events that would get the kids to the synagogue for a Shabbaton. They would become more engaged. That's not so much the case now. I'm hearing from Rabbi Russell that it's hard to get kids to come to USY meetings and participate. I think once a teenager has been bar bat mitzvahed, then we tend to lose them, and I think that's a mistake. I think we should try to, at the minimum, get them to come back once a year to do their parsha again. But I think they could become leaders within let's say, if there's a Hebrew school or something, to engage them in becoming assistant teachers or doing more social action projects as a group. So I think there's ways of engaging them. If you don't engage them, they will not come. And also, one of the comments of, I believe it was Rabbi Grossman, she said, one thing that conservative Judaism does not do well is sort of spread the word among the teens. So in other words, one teen invites another teen to join, and incentives to that. She said that that's done well by some other groups like BBYO, where you grow the base population by inviting more and more people in, and so it starts to blossom, And so I think one has to look at that approach. And I think that certainly USY has been through some difficult times recently. There's been a big investigation about problems that they've been having to do with sexual harassment and things like that. And they are just kind of coming out of that and making policies, and hopefully whoever's working on USY will start to improve that experience. Some people have said it's so 1980s, it's like it's not relevant anymore. Also, encouraging the synagogue to have children go to Jewish summer camp, whether it's Ramah or another. But as I mentioned earlier, the Jewish summer camp experience, and this has been shown in studies, not just my personal experience, but it makes a huge difference in the viewpoint and lives and future practice of young Jewish people. And so that's really important. And getting the parents back at home to coordinate with the camp in terms of cooperating with them. Like if they feel it's important for kids to bring their tefillin to camp, that to cooperate with that. So sometimes there's a disconnect between what the kids want, what the parents want, what they're willing to cooperate with the camp.
Andrew Pascal asks, why is the conservative movement worth saving when the lines between conservative and reform are becoming more and more blurred?
That's a really big question, and all I can say is that having been involved with the conservative movement, as I mentioned, since childhood, I have a soft spot for it because I feel, for me, especially when I got married, where I came from an Orthodox synagogue, my husband was more culturally Jewish, my first husband, and so conservatives seemed to make the most sense, and it was sort of a comfort zone for me. I always felt like I didn't want there to be now it's a little bit less. There used to be more, I think, a lot more English in a Reform synagogue service than there is now. Now I think there's more Hebrew, and so the lines are a little bit less blurred. But for me, having that balance between tradition and modernity felt right, and I think that's still the case for a lot of people. It's just that we need to make that experience also meaningful for the young generation and find out what it is to them that's going to make conservative Judaism worth saving. Because we're already in it, we've been in it, we've done it, but it's the new generation that's going to make the difference.
Great. Delilah asks, what might incentivize parents to prioritize investing in their child's conservative Jewish identity, especially with the barriers to entry that you'd mentioned before?
Well, I think as a parent myself, and I always felt that bringing Judaism, Judaic practices, rituals, the joys of Judaism into the family is such a positive thing. In fact, for people who know me, some people might know that when I first met my first husband, he hadn't had a bar mitzvah yet because, as I mentioned, he was culturally Jewish, right? And so one of the the things that I made him do before we got married was to study for his bar mitzvah and have a bar mitzvah before we got married. And the reason I did that was, and he did it all throughout our engagement, every week he dutifully went to his bar mitzvah teacher, and at our aufruf, he had his bar mitzvah. And the reason I did that wasn't just to torture him or anything like that, but it was to make our home be one of two parents that are participating in the Jewish life of our children. Okay, and I feel that helps to reinforce the other, and Jewish ritual and holidays and family life is so beautiful, and it just enhances the quality of one's marriage and hopefully the experience for the children. And don't forget, in the Shema it says, and you shall teach your children, right? So in order to teach your children, you yourself might need to take some classes, or you might need to learn how to say the Shema if you don't know already, and so I would encourage parents, when their kids are, if not sooner, hopefully sooner, if their kids are having a bar mitzvah or going to Hebrew school, they should also take it upon themselves to learn Jewish concepts and learn the prayers, and so that it just is a generally supportive thing to do when your kids are in that position. And I think if they see their parents are doing it, that gives them more impetus to stay engaged themselves.
I don't see any more questions in the chat. Oh, here we go. Randy Lester Wilson. As co-parent of an adult daughter who happens to be trans, what engagement options would she find within a conservative setting?
I think that's a really good question. I think that the conservative movement has made rulings and responses that address LGBTQ, issues and have been accepting of anyone that has that orientation, and and so that's one of the things that they've done. They have addressed it in that sense. Sometimes it's taken a while for them to actually get it in writing, but it's been under discussion for a long time, and they've made some very important rulings about that. One of the organizations that I found out about in this process is when I interviewed Rabbi Renee Lappy, who was one of the first graduates of the Jewish Theological Seminary, who became a female rabbi. She is head of an organization called Sfara, I believe, and her organization is very much oriented to that. And she made some suggestions about also that the faculty of seminaries should be reflective of the students. And so you have to diversify your faculty as in order to be relevant to the diversified student population. And so that's kind of an important thing. So I think just staying engaged and trying maybe even to find other trans Jews that are looking to be engaged. And I know in San Francisco we have one synagogue, Shahar Zahav, that is oriented toward the LGBTQ community. It's a whole vibrant synagogue. So there are opportunities out there. Sometimes you just have to look for them.
Okay. Rabbi Michal, I know this sounds very simplistic, but maybe profound. Do you think the actual name conservative may attract young folks?
Are you acting if it attracts it or repels them? I think, conservative nowadays has dual meanings, of course, and probably has many meanings, but two big ones that we know of. Excuse me. I think one of the reasons that it came about to begin with was to conserve traditions, okay, at the same time being modern, okay. So that's how it came about. Now, at some point during the strategic planning process for the USCJ, they might say, well, maybe we need to change our name. Okay, there is Masorti, which is another name for the conservative movement, but I can understand your question, but at the moment, I think we've got it, and so at the moment we just have to maybe educate young people why it is called that, as opposed to, and making sure that they understand that it doesn't mean that it's necessarily politically conservative.
We don't have any more in the chat. And it's
I'm wondering
1:08,
if any
so
faculty members or anyone would like to, respond. Not in the chat box, live. Not that it's not live, the chat box.
May I?
Go for it.
As a child of the Reform movement and a Musmach of HUC, and somebody who worked in a conservative synagogue for most of my career, and having seen both types of institutions, first of all, kol hakavod for Linda, for your observations and your organization. And yes, I hope they read your material. But I just have to remark that some of the questions were leading towards this idea of lines being blurred and merger and that kind of thing. Remember Rabbi David Ellenson, a dear personal friend of blessed memory, taught many, many years ago that it's institutions that keep our movements apart and not people, and the preservation of institutions, which is one of the reasons why I'm very proud to be part of a trans-denominational seminary, as we all are. That being in mind, it's clear that whether the institutions merge or not, this coming together is happening. And for those of you who are going to be entering into the rabbinate, in very soon, future years, it's going to be on you, and it's going to be on your agenda as to how to make this meshing of institutions happen where previously it may not have been possible.
So Linda, I'm wondering, do you have a closing comment? I know we have to get to class, and
I just want to thank everyone for being here, and for, again, especially to Revital and Jonathan for their support throughout this process. There were many, many drafts that went through, many late night emails at 3 in the morning or whatever. And I just want to thank them for their energy, their insights, and support throughout this process. It's really was quite a process to go through, and I do hope that if you have any questions, any of you, please do feel free to email me, and be happy to continue the conversation. And thanks again to all of my family and friends, especially my daughter, who is tuning in from Jerusalem. See you in a few weeks, Julie, and anybody else who I missed as well. Thank you so much.